You're listening to One Free Family, a new take on peaceful parenting, where you can hear ideas for helping to raise free, independent, and peaceful children. Visit onefreefamily.com to connect and listen. Here are your hosts, James and Taylor Davis.
Welcome back to One Free Family. This is James.
And Taylor.
And we're pumped to bring you yet another episode. We're on a roll now.
We are on a roll.
After a winter of kind of coming and going, we're certainly excited to be back in the studios of my parents' attic to talk about praise today. Praise is a subject that when I first heard that there were these like different theories about praise, it sounded kind of boring to me, to be honest. But as I've dived deep into the world of praise and all the different competing ideologies on the best ways to praise kids or not praise them, I actually find it pretty interesting.
Yeah, you were even inspired to make an infographic one time all about it.
I did for summer camps.
Not boring.
Yeah, I made a really sweet infographic.
Maybe we'll share it in the group.
Maybe if you're lucky and you can see my sweet PowerPoint skills from a decade ago where the buttons seem to jump right off the page.
Yeah, just wait for it. Just make sure you request to join our group, One Free Family on Facebook. We'll pop it in there.
A little giveaway.
Yeah.
All right. Sure.
Feel free to share it anywhere and everywhere.
The data is solid, even if it points you to summercamprevolution.com, which is my old summer camp hype website, I'll call it. So as we think about praise, I think it's always good to start with the definitions of something or figure out what it is we're exactly talking about. Because I think most people understand what it means when I say, hey, I was praising him. But I think at the next level is pretty interesting. And that's talking about why adults praise kids, right? Because I think there are a few different reasons.
Sure.
I think on a basic level, most people praise others because it feels good for both parties in their mind, right? They're like, if I say this nice thing to that person, they'll feel good. I'll see them feel happier. That will make me feel good. Mm-hmm. Everybody wins, right? And I think actually from adult to adult, by and large, this can be true. I think I actually have seen plenty of examples where people kind of bristle at being praised. Like I'm reminded of one person I know in my life who is like super competent and does really well in basically all the things that she's taken a serious interest in. And then she felt one time that her parents were praising her for something she was doing, and they sounded like surprised to her. And she was like, why the big shock that this thing I'm working on is going well? Like,
right.
I don't want to get into specifics to out that person, but it's like, and so I think it's good to keep in mind that praise, even if I believe the intentions are almost always pretty good, that it's not always received that way. And if it's not always received that way on an relatively even power dynamic from adult to adult, I believe that it doesn't always lead to positive results from adults to children.
Yeah, and I think that there's also a piece of how we praise kids that I think is just habit. Like, I don't think we're always intentionally planning to praise our children a lot, but I think,
yeah, for sure.
I think sometimes it's habit, right? It's just natural instinct. Like when our kid does something that we think is cool, like our gut reaction can just be large amounts of praise and kind of gushing, at least for some people. I know for me, that's still kind of like what my instinct wants to do.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's natural. It comes from a good place. I think there is a more cynical wing of praisers. Like, frankly, when I was learning child development theory the first time around, there was a lot of talk about using praise as a manipulation tool. And it wasn't...
I don't think that word was openly stated.
But that was the gist, right? The idea was that by praising certain things in kids, you could get them to elicit those behaviors more.
Absolutely.
And I think it's... Yeah, and I think the idea is like, hey, if I keep telling these kids how great they are if they sit quietly in class or walk in a straight line or whatever, that they'll get kind of hooked on that praise and they'll want more of it. And so they'll keep behaving well and we'll go from there. And so this can manifest itself. And again, you're right. I don't think I should have used the word manipulation because I think, again, it actually comes from a positive place where people think the kid's life will be better too if they keep up with these behaviors. So this can manifest itself in verbal praise. It can be behavior charts, systems of check
like
marks,
rewards and
minuses, just anything that is giving kids constant feedback on or consistent feedback on something with an effort to modify future behavior.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a whole nother wing of it. And, as we kind of go through, we will address each of these. But,
yeah, and I think talk about kind of the unintended consequences of that.
Yeah.
Of that kind of reward system for behavior.
Sure. So, yeah, and we'll get to that in a second. So let's start with the well-intentioned praise from our perspective, because I do think, even though it's just totally a habit, I do it, and I continually, even now, having thought about this many, many times, will still find myself praising people in ways that I wouldn't if I was taking a moment to think, should I praise this person for this or not? And yeah, just talk about strategies for changing the way we interact. If you're persuaded by this argument, maybe you think the following argument's going to be silly and not something for you. And
I would say we might kind of specify as we talk about this, but keep in mind that I think we're talking about this in kind of two realms. One of them is kind of behavior and how our children act and behave in the world. And then the other piece, I think, is about like learning and intelligence and academics and accomplishments and things like that.
Sure.
And of course, there's plenty of crossover, but...
So I think, in my work in learning about this, interacting with other professionals in the space of working with kids, especially young kids, one of the pieces that's been cited very often over the course of the last 15 years is Carol Dweck's book, Mindset. And this is a book you brought to me, actually.
I read it when I was a teacher.
Yeah. And I was blown away by this book in my first reading of it and just the general takeaways. And if I had to sum up, well, do you want to sum up Dweck's kind of like overall hypothesis here? Yeah,
so Carol Dweck is like one of the leading researchers, or at least at the time she wrote this book, was one of the leading researchers on motivation and more specifically in the academic realm. And the book is called Mindset. I highly recommend it. It's just super fascinating read. What her research shows is she talks about these two types of mindsets. One of them is called a fixed mindset and one of them is called a growth mindset. So she talks about the fixed mindset, which is kind of the belief that people hold that intelligence is fixed. And she talks about the growth mindset, which is a belief that people hold that intelligence is malleable and can change. And so her research looks at kind of how whichever belief you hold plays out as far as kind of your behaviors and your future success.
Your attitude about yourself.
And again, her research is done largely in the academic setting. So I think it's important to remember that. But so she talks, if you have a fixed mindset and you believe that intelligence is fixed, it's going to affect your behavior in the sense that you're going to kind of see the idea of like putting effort into something that feels hard as fruitless because you don't think it's going to bear any fruit for you. You're going to see challenges or getting things wrong as terrible because you don't think you can improve and do better. And if you have a growth mindset, you're going to see effort as worthwhile and you're going to put more effort into things and you're going to believe that like mistakes are a part of the learning process. And you may even, if you really get there, celebrate these mistakes and understand that this is how we learn.
Yeah. And I think the reality is that in their natural state, I believe most people exist somewhere along a spectrum between these two things. I think most people probably don't believe that they could eventually turn themselves into Einstein with just enough elbow grease. And on the same token, I've interacted with very few people that think, well, I'm just exactly the same as I'll always be. Practice doesn't matter at all.
Right.
And so for the purposes of this, the way I like to kind of use this work is to try to think about how this should influence. Well, I think it's useful for self-reflection for sure, but I think I try to use it, and when I try to teach others about it, in terms of how should this affect how I'm interacting with others, and especially kids. And the second piece of the takeaways often come in this form of praise, right? So the idea is that when we're talking to kids and interacting with them, and this is how I used to teach it, I don't teach it this way anymore, we should actually be praising the growth mindset qualities, right? Like when we see a kid trying really hard, we should run in there and say, hey, you're trying really hard.
You're
Congrats.
saying you do that or don't do that.
I'm saying
now.
This is what I used to do.
Oh, okay.
You sound skeptical, but
no, go ahead.
Yes, you do. Don't tell me no. But so that's where that was the first conclusion I came to after interacting with Dweck's work, that I should take this idea that growth mindset good, fixed mindset sort of bad. And when I see someone exhibiting a growth mindset, I should praise them for it. And when I see someone exhibiting a fixed mindset, I should essentially try to correct it or disagree with them or whatever. And I don't know that I necessarily believe that fully anymore. I still think that's a huge step up from where I was prior to interacting with Dweck's work. Like when I would see a kid doing really well on something and I would come and say something like, "Whoa, you're so smart. That's so easy for you," you know? Because, and as we think about what that communicates to the child, well, that communicates that you were born with this inherent fixed quality of smartness. And you know that because this project is now easy for you. This is a lot of what I heard when I was a kid. Not to brag about being good at first grade math, but when you're a kid in most places and things come easy to you, you're told about how smart you are. And that feels really good. And the problem, of course, is that no matter how smart you are, at some point you're going to encounter something that's difficult. And if you've been made to believe that when things are easy, it's a reflection of your smartness, well, what are you going to believe when you encounter a hard thing?
Right.
You're going to feel, well, this must mean I'm dumb now, or when it comes to this.
And I just can't do this.
Exactly.
Right?
And so instead, encountering that same child when they're doing something that comes easily for them, and you feel like, whoa, this kid is smart, or like they're very skilled in this certain area, interacting with them in some sort of different way. At the very least, avoiding gushing to them about some quality they were born with that they had very little control over. And I still think that part is a useful
Yeah, I mean, I think it's useful to actually give feedback when you see somebody working hard on something. And that's what Carol Dweck argues too, that if we're going to offer feedback or praise to kids, that it should be reinforcing behaviors around a growth mindset. So saying like, I see you working really, really hard on that. And I noticed that like when you tried this other approach, because the one before didn't work, you kind of got a little bit closer to what you wanted to do. So it's less, I think, about praise and more of like feedback that helps them tap into this idea of different mindsets. And I think that depending on how old the child is and what their what their capacity is to understand mindsets, I think talking with them about the way they view themselves and the way that they view learning can be really helpful. Like one thing she talks about is actually teaching kids about how the brain functions can be really helpful in helping them develop a growth mindset, because if kids start to learn about how like new neural connections are formed in the brain, they actually start to get an understanding of like, oh, okay, so when I get this thing wrong or I mess up, that's changing my brain structure and I'm learning from it. So I think personally that it can be valuable to give kids feedback in the sense of like seeing them being persistent or seeing them try something new because the thing before it didn't work. I think steering towards that, and like you said, James, away from like, oh, you're just so smart is really helpful in helping them develop a growth mindset, because what her research looks at and has found is that the growth mindset in people is what can typically lead them to be more successful. And I don't really remember exactly how she defines success. That's obviously another loaded word, but I think that it can be beneficial when we're talking about self-directed learning and wanting to honor our kids' kind of natural desire to learn to help them stay in that growth mindset place.
Yeah, we agree actually. And I think
cool.
You were making, I think there is a subtle distinction in what you were making. So like, basically I was saying that I wouldn't want to rush in and be like, whoa, look at, you're trying so hard, buddy. Good job.
Yeah, totally.
That's kind of what I was suggesting when I say, but I used to think that you should do that.
Yeah. Okay. So it's like a little more nuanced than that maybe.
So the idea in that case, again, if we think about what praise communicates, I think this is like a really important concept for me that I had to wrap my mind around, which is that when you come in and offer unsolicited feedback on the quality of what someone is doing, the implication is that it really matters what your opinion is about this thing, right? So like, if someone comes in and if the boss looks over your shoulder and says, "Good job, Davis, you're working really hard here," you're like, yeah, the boss likes me. Because it matters what the boss thinks of what you do. And that is the power dynamic that exists in your job or whatever. In the case of just another human being that you're hoping to have a partnership with, it feels weird. If you look through the adult lens, if I came and looked over your shoulder while you were working and just started praising how hard you were working, that would feel weird, right?
Right.
And again, I think if you were unaware that your hard work was leading to good benefits, in the case of a child, oftentimes that is the case, then it's okay to like do what you were saying, which is that pointing out, like drawing that line and saying,
sure,
hey, last week you were like so frustrated when you were trying to figure out how to ollie on your skateboard. And now you can do it. Like,
right.
That's crazy. Like, just think about how amazing our bodies are. I'll do this with the kids all the time. Like, just think about how amazing our bodies are, that something can feel so hard. And just by doing it a few times, we can literally teach our brain to form connections to do it in the future. Like, isn't that amazing? Because if the other piece, like I'm just praising you because I'm sort of in charge, if that communicates that the idea that what really matters is what I think of what you're doing, the growth mindset approach actually places the emphasis on the total opposite thing, which is that it's coming in and it's a voice or a message of empowerment. It says, you are the person that controls what your ceiling is on this activity.
Right.
And I'm pointing out to you that regardless of whatever else anyone thought or did, or even what you thought at first, you were capable of doing this thing because we are malleable. We can improve. We can be better. And I've seen that attitude of empowerment make a huge difference, because I think many people, including our kids at times and me and you too probably, it's very easy to fall into these untrue things we want to tell ourselves at first when things are hard, like this is impossible, or I'm just crappy at this, or I have a brown thumb, I can't be a gardener, or I'm just not a natural piano player, or whatever, right?
And I also think that I was just thinking about this as I was listening to you. Like, as a kid, I got a lot of praise from teachers and family members, especially for my kind of performance academically and my work in school. And I 100% like wanted that praise all the time.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's been really interesting to think about that as an adult now, because I largely, most of the work that I do now is self-directed. I don't have a boss, and I'm self-employed, and there is a lot less praise coming my way than when I was a kid for like the things that I create in my work, or the ways that I help people, or the information that I put out into the world. And like, of course, sometimes I get feedback that I helped somebody, and that's great. But it's kind of been like a hard thing to get used to, that I am not just going to get that all the time, right? And I think that if I hadn't been conditioned to seek that as a child so much, it would be easier now, and almost easier in the sense of like, I think it can become very limiting. Like, I think I catch myself, especially recently as I've thought about it more, like in these getting stuck because of these limiting beliefs that I have, instead of feeling like I can take these risks and go out there and try new things, because I'm just not getting the constant influx of praise.
Yeah, and actually that's something I see a lot at the Big Fish Learning Cooperative, where I've been helping out, is especially kids that are coming right out of school. A lot of times they have difficulty with self-evaluation, because whether we call it praise or something else, even offering grades, especially unsolicited ones, where the kid isn't like, hey, will you grade this?
Can I get some feedback here?
Yeah. Which is, by the way, actually super useful when you can get when
you're asking,
when you can get in the mindset of asking for feedback. But at first, it's very difficult for them to try to figure out, like, am I doing well? Am I succeeding as I push forward towards what are even my goals? I'm not even used to setting my own goals, because my goals have been so structured around seeking praise. And again, this can be grades. Grades are a form of praise or punishment, And when you really fall into that habit, that can be a very difficult habit to break. And again, it can lead to kind of a helpless mindset, right? Where you're like, well, I can't even generate that good feeling for myself, because it necessarily has to come from someone else.
I've become dependent on getting it elsewhere.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, so this is why, and this is the nuanced, multifaceted world of praise, where it's something that I really think comes with the absolute best of intentions, but the more we peel it back, the less I want to do it.
I know. And that's interesting. I've talked to a lot of parents about praise, and it feels really weird when you first encounter these ideas in this research, because you're just like, well, what if I'm not supposed to praise my kids, what do I do? Right? Like, it feels so counterintuitive. But I know for me that when I started seeing this research and reading it more and more and thinking about it more and more, like, I couldn't ignore it anymore, because the unintended consequences that have been shown to come from this kind of praise just are not what I would want for my kids.
Right. I think filling in the gaps of what we can do is probably going to be useful for people here too. Because I remember feeling very frustrated early on, where I was like, I get it. Praise isn't as good as I thought. What should I do? Right?
Yeah. What now?
Yeah. And so I think we've talked about this just a little bit, because I actually do think there are a lot of really warm and kind ways to interact with someone when you appreciate what they're doing. And I think, again, there's a lot of nuance and subtlety here. So I'll start with when someone does something for me that really helps me or makes me feel good, right? So let's say I'm working on the dishes and one of our sons comes in and starts clearing the table to help me out, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't view it as praising him when I communicate very earnestly how grateful I am for his help, right? So that's the first thing, that if you see someone being really kind to others and just being helpful or helping you, I think it's awesome to acknowledge that and say,
like, genuine gratitude.
Yeah. And again, I think there are probably the purists in the praise department that would say, well, you don't want to make it all about your thing, but I'm also just a human being. And when someone behaves in a way that benefits me or helps me to feel better or makes my day easier, I'm going to let them know that I appreciate that. And I think that's probably a pretty safe way to proceed through the world. And also modeling that behavior, I'm very comfortable with that too. Like if someone helps my kid or, does something generous or nice for them, I'm happy for them to have seen the example of someone expressing gratitude.
Sure.
Right? So that's the first thing I would say. And then there's the event of watching a kid work on something and pursue a goal. And I think when you walk in and you see, that moment of accomplishment, like finally the kid, like in our life right now, it's like balancing a broom on your finger for 10 seconds or accomplishing. These are the big things that are happening in our house right now. Or like skiing down a hill that they once thought was impossible, right? We had that experience multiple times this winter. Learning to ride the bike, like we talked about on a recent episode.
Or I'd say recently when one of our kids decided he was ready to start picking up a pen and trying to write his letters more legibly and make a card for his grandma. And that was another one where I think he had like an aha moment of like, oh, I can do this.
Right. So what did you say? Like, how did you respond?
Yeah. So this has been my lens for this. And I don't know that it's perfect, but this is just where I am right now. So I'm just going to share my own experience. Currently, when I see my kids accomplish something, I respond to them, or I aspire to respond to them through the lens of reflecting back to them how I notice it's made them feel. Because in my mind, I really want them to try things and pursue things because they're intrinsically motivated. I don't want them to do something to make me proud. And I know that sounds weird to a lot of parents, but I think that down the road, if they're making decisions based on what they think will make me proud, I think I really run the risk of them choosing something that's not going to be fulfilling to them because we're just really different people. Yeah. So I really try to respond to them in the sense of like, wow, I noticed that you just like jumped up and down and got so excited when you accomplished that. That must feel really good. And then that opens the door for them to be like, yeah, I tried this and I tried that. And then it's like a lot of questions too. Like, how did you figure that out? How did you get there? Like, what did you do that maybe didn't work until you got to the thing that worked? Of course, if I wasn't there when they were kind of going through the whole process, and it kind of looks similar if you're there with them through the process, just reflecting back to them what they're doing. And I think that like my lens is always like, how can I help them just tap into the idea that like this was intrinsically motivated for them and that this is feeling really good and exciting for them. And yeah, I don't know. Is that clear? That's kind of where I come from. I would say like another one that's a really common one, especially if you have littler kids who are doing more kind of like arts and crafts, or a kid who really sticks with art and really loves it. You hear a lot of people in this space talk about how to offer feedback on your kid's artwork, for example, without it just being like, wow, I love that. That's so beautiful. And that also looks like asking questions about what they've made or noticing specific things about the drawing that they've made. So like, I noticed you used a lot of different colors in this picture. What made you want to choose these colors? Or yeah, it's just specific questions about their art and feedback about what you notice. Or I noticed while you were drawing, like you were kind of like listening to music and bouncing up and down while you were doing it. Were you enjoying yourself? Like things like that open up a conversation. They show your child that you're interested in what's important to them, and they help your child reflect on what the process felt like for them and how they were kind of moving themselves along because it was interesting and exciting to them.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And I think the idea that you're taking interest in someone without shifting the conversation to it being about what your opinion is.
Exactly.
Because like, again, if your best friend got their PhD and just defended their thesis and came and told you about it, you could think about how you would respond to that. You'd be like, well, congratulations. Like, you worked really hard on that.
That was a lot of years of a lot of hard work.
I know you were really nervous and like, it must feel amazing to have that off your shoulders, right? You might say something like that. What you wouldn't say is like, hey, good job,
I
Taylor.
am so proud of you.
Yeah, like you got that thesis done. You did a really good job on your thesis. And like, yeah, dude, I know.
Exactly.
I was the one with my head in the thesis all the time, right? And yeah, actually, this reminds me of brings us into a little bit of a segue, but it reminds me of...
Oh, can I just say one thing really quick then?
It's not a huge segue.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
It has to do with email exchange I had with Alfie Kohn. Yes,
we haven't talked about him yet on this episode.
Famous enough to have emailed once with Alfie Kohn about something.
You might want to tell people who Alfie Kohn is in case they don't know.
Alfie Kohn is a super well-known and pretty radical child development researcher, or person who...
He's an author.
Yeah, curator of research is another way to think of him. Yeah, he's an author. He writes and speaks about how the best ways to interact with kids if we want positive outcomes for them in the future. And in the interest of full disclosure, I don't know if I'm totally all in on every single thing I've ever read from Alfie Kohn, but he really makes me think. And
I think his one book is called Punished by Rewards, right?
Punished by Rewards is the most famous one for having to do with this specific subject. But, I was kind of asking him the same question when I first started running my fingers through this research, which is like, what do we do in the what do we do instead department?
Yeah.
And this is where it's not too big of a segue.
Yeah.
And he offered up the idea of focusing on unconditional care. And I thought this was a really...
Oh, right. Unconditional parenting.
That's another one of his.
book.
But the idea of unconditional care, and we're highlighting the word unconditional here because he pointed out in his email to me that praise is by definition conditional. Right?
Yes.
It's, you do this, then I behave this way, versus unconditional care, which is that when we're constantly present and active in our kids' lives and we're there with them when they first start trying to ollie on the skateboard and they're falling and cutting their knees, and we're there and helping to put the Band-Aids on and helping them figure out if they want to get back on and try again. And if we're there from that process all the way through to the time where they're either do the ollie or not, by the way. Like sometimes our kids are going to have goals they don't meet.
They don't hit, yeah.
But we're just there connected with them through that process. The whole thing is going to feel so much more natural than it is if the kid is just like off doing whatever and then reports back when they've reached a milestone or accomplished something, right? Because then we're interacting and it's very normal for us to kind of be interacting along the whole process.
So it's like it all exists together. Like in the way that I just explained how I try to offer my kids feedback or interest and engagement when they're excited about an accomplishment,
right.
That exists at the same time as I'm sitting with them when they're struggling to learn something and talking to them about the value of effort and talking to them about like, okay, you tried this one thing and it didn't work. And I noticed that you're feeling frustrated. What else could we try? Do you need to take a break and come back to it? Or do you want to talk about other ideas? So if you're, like you said, if you're unconditionally with them through, or like he said to you, through the process, this like interest and conversation when they do reach a goal or when they do feel proud is really natural.
Yeah.
And they're not only getting feedback from you based on accomplishing something. Yeah,
that's it. And I think you're describing partnership, right? Like
right.
You're describing when two people are in this thing together, that often feels the very best. Like you're there for the low parts, the high parts, everything in between. And you're just on that journey together.
Yeah.
And I think that's what our whole parenting approach is about.
And I think it does take a lot of reflection. Like I would maybe even think about, I think for me, when I was really resistant to the idea of not praising my kids at first, I wasn't really sure, like you said, what to do instead. And I just kept having this nagging thought of like, well, but it feels so good to be praised. I want to give them that. Like, how could I deprive them of that? And I've heard other parents say that too. And it might be different for everybody, but I think what shifted it for me was starting to reflect on how high levels of praise based on accomplishment have manifested in my own life. And like the long-term consequences of that. And when I started to see how that has played out for me, it convinced me that I didn't want it to play out the same way for my kids. Like in so many ways, when it comes to the limiting beliefs that I hold, when it comes to how hard I'm willing to try at things that feel hard when it comes to like what I'm thinking about when I make decisions. Am I thinking about what I want for myself? Am I thinking about what's going to make the people around me proud? So when I started seeing how it manifested for me and wishing for something a little bit different, that is where I was able to shift and say, okay, this like the momentary rush of like feel good hormones that my kid might get from being praised is not worth like the result in the end or the unintended consequences. And it doesn't mean I just have to stop praising them. It means there's another way, which is kind of all the things we just talked about.
Absolutely. And I think you highlighted a lot of actually what Alfie, my buddy Alfie, was saying in those further emails, which is that recognizing that instinct to praise oftentimes comes, it's more like we feel like we need to say it rather than the kid needs it. Like, so often we praise at the moment the kid's feeling great anyway.
Exactly.
And so it's like they're already there. And then also that kids are clever enough to understand that they're being praised for some things, but not for others too. Mm-hmm. And again, like the branch of child development theory that says like it's okay that adults will sculpt kids' behavior and so on, even in these academic sort of ways, we'll say like, who cares? Like, let them notice that they're not being praised for their bad things they do or the things they're wasting their time on, like video games or something.
Right.
But this other branch would say that kids, that lack of praise in other areas will lead to the limiting beliefs you described.
Exactly.
Saying like, wow, Taylor, we love your dance and your art. And you're like, well, what about my math and my science? Like,
right.
I think I'm pretty good at math, but I can never get praised about math.
Or
like,
I really love math, even if I'm not great at it, and I want to keep spending time on it.
And frankly, too, and this is what's funny as well. I was in a different conversation recently about what amount. All right, let me put this differently: the degree to which talent matters versus the degree to which work ethic matters. Mm-hmm. And underneath work ethic, I think is also passion. Like typically the passion can come from wherever, but like you need some amount of passion to generate work ethic, even if it's the passion to please your parents. And everyone agreed in this conversation that the absolute highest ceiling is when there's a combination of passion plus talent, right? Mm-hmm. So, LeBron James is probably the best raw athlete for basketball and probably the most talented. And so that's great. Good for him. He gets to be the best. But everywhere beneath that is this group of people that possesses some amount of talent and some amount of interest in something. And I think the next level, the interesting conversation is like, well, what if passion for something, like you're talking about, what if I just like math? Mm-hmm. I think probably people that just like something, even if it's not their natural talent, will often achieve more things than people that have the talent but don't have the passion.
Oh, for sure.
But I think it's counterintuitive to people because when you see kids and you're like, oh, that Johnny's going to be a great athlete someday. It's like, well, Johnny just wanted to be in plays.
Well, and not only will they maybe achieve more, but they're going to be more satisfied with their lives.
Well, and then to you and I, that matters more. But even to the people that...
But I think most parents would actually say that does matter to them. True. Even though maybe they're not actually doing the things to help that come to fruition. I think that they would say that matters. They want their children to grow up and be happy.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think that a lot of times parents view the path to happiness as like, well, you're already starting with this one big skill set. So like, why not just continue to nurture this from the time you're 5 on, and then you'll just like be a virtuoso on the guitar. And it's like, but if we try to maintain that space for kids to pick things up and put things down as they want, and that's actually another, maybe the final point from Alfie Kohn that he was saying, which is that, the first do no harm approach to interacting with our kids is pretty solid, which is like make space for them to do the things they're interested in, have kind of a neutrally enthusiastic view of all of the things that they get involved in and kind of let the rest sort itself out so that we don't lead to that unintended limiting beliefs that you described.
Yeah. And I think I want to go back to something you said before, which was the idea that we're giving kids praise at the moment, especially that they really don't need it. They're already feeling really great. I do want to point out though, that like part of the potential damage of giving this praise is that we create a situation where our kids do need it, right? Like, I think they come into the world not needing it, but if they start getting praised constantly for accomplishing things, then they actually start to feel like they need it. And when they're not needing it, or when they're not getting it, they wonder what's wrong with them.
Yeah, they ask like, what's wrong?
And so, yes, I think the natural state is definitely not needing it, but we can create a situation where they feel like they do. I don't think it means that all is lost and that you should just give up. Like, I think we can slowly start to re-examine our ways of interacting with our kids, even if we have been giving a lot of praise in the past. This is another point that I wanted to make before when I was talking about, like you were talking about giving your friend feedback on his thesis. And I had said something like, yeah, you're not just going to say to him, I'm so proud of you. You know, I think the pride one is a big one that comes into play for people, because I don't know about other people, but I actually do often feel very proud of my kids. Right. And that's a really cool feeling. One little like hack that I read somewhere that I have used, instead of telling them I'm proud of them, so that, because I really don't want them to seek, again, like my approval, or I don't want them to do things just to make me proud, I will say to them, like, are you feeling proud of yourself right now? Or you appear to be proud of yourself right now. That's probably such a good feeling for you. So I think like feeling proud of accomplishments is great. And I have kind of trained myself, instead of telling them I'm proud of them, to reflect back to them the feelings of pride that I see them having in their own work. Yeah,
I think that's valuable. And I think, what we're continuing to try to express as we probably move somewhat close to wrapping it up here is that this is a super nuanced subject. And, if you didn't, if you feel like you are hearing this and you're like, well, that's not what I've done in the past, all is absolutely never lost in this department, because our relationships, we're just talking about one aspect of our relationships, right? So as our relationships continue to grow and develop, we can make transitions like this. And I think, though, that if those feelings of, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Sort of arise. I do think, though, that it is valuable to look critically at this, because I think especially, like, even if you didn't want to go whole hog into the, well, I'm never going to praise, I'm going to do all this other stuff sort of realm, I do think it is pretty important to think really critically about what it is you are expressing is important to you, to your kids. And, something we started on in the beginning, but even as a first step for most people, I think stepping away from that sort of fixed mindset praise. It can either be in intelligence, but it can be in other qualities outside of our control too. Looks are the one that come to mind most relevantly for me, because the reality is your kid might be the cutest kid in the entire world to you. At some point, someone is going to express to him or her that they are not the prettiest person in the world, whether it's rejecting a romantic advance or going out of their way to say it, because that's going to happen to most people at some point. Thinking that you're good looking and that that's a really important aspect of you, in my experience, has been a recipe for a lot of heartache. And not to say you can't work through it and it's not irreparable or anything like that, but starting quickly to kind of de-emphasize those things, especially in appearance from my perspective, because appearance is one of the things that we're told is most important about us, that we have the absolute least control over. The more we can de-emphasize that, because we're going to get that from the rest of the world anyway, in all likelihood, I think that moves us closer to our kids seeing us as that unconditional source of love and attention. And it really helps to set them up to not value themselves based on something that is kind of just other people's opinion,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think like this might feel like a lot and it might feel overwhelming. So yeah, maybe just start by seeing if you can scale back on the praise for like the things that are fixed, right? That people can't control. That might be a really great place to start. Grab Alfie Kohn's Punished by Rewards or Unconditional Parenting from the library and give it a read and see how it resonates with you, or Carol Dweck's Mindset. Have a conversation with your partner about this, or have them listen, and just start exploring it and thinking about it. And maybe also, if you are the type to reflect or journal, try to sit and reflect about how praise has been used with you in your life from your childhood, and maybe how it's played out for you. And that might give you some further insights into kind of where you hope to go with your own relationship with your kids.
Absolutely. And this is an episode that will be filled with show notes. There's actually, if you don't want to jump right into Punished by Rewards, Alfie Kohn has written a number of essays online, and there's two in particular that I can link there as well.
Perfect.
The best one I remember was criticizing praise, or criticizing common criticisms of praise. And if you can check that out, I think it'll at least get your mind turning, because, we're just on this journey trying to figure it all out. And in a field where there are competing ideas from really smart people that I respect, I find it fun to sink my teeth in and figure out what I believe.
Yep. So thanks so much for joining us on this journey. Keep in mind that every moment is a new opportunity to be the parent that you hope to be.
Love you guys. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to One Free Family. If you enjoy the podcast, Please show your support by becoming a patron at onefreefamily.com/support. Your support will help make this show better. Plus, you can get access to rewards and additional episodes by joining. Again, that's onefreefamily.com/support. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.